Hi, I'm Callista. They told me I was part of the family, until the moment she poured scalding coffee over my head, in front of diplomats, friends, my own parents, and screamed, "Get out! You don't belong here!" But what burned more than the coffee was the years I spent believing I was less than her, less than them. They erased me from the will, sold what was mine, called me a burden behind closed doors, and I kept quiet, until the truth they buried came back in my grandmother's handwriting. Now I know exactly who I am, and soon, so will everyone else. But before we dive in, tell me, have you ever stayed silent too long, until silence nearly erased you? Drop a comment. I read every word. I didn't want to go to that brunch. Not because I had other plans or anything pressing to do, I just knew how it would make me feel. Out of place, invisible, like furniture no one bothers to dust off. But my mother insisted. "It's important for the family," she said. Victoria organized it herself. That last part should have been the warning. I arrived a little early, hoping to avoid a grand entrance. The place was polished and loud with quiet wealth. Polished marble floors, fresh hydrangeas at every table, waitstaff who knew your name before you sat down. They knew Victoria's anyway. She swept in 10 minutes later like she owned the damn place. Her smile was tight, lips pressed into perfection, sunglasses perched on her head though we were indoors. One of the staff pulled out her chair like she was royalty. When she saw me already seated, her smile slipped a fraction, barely a tick. But I saw it. "Callista," she said, voice as crisp as the linen napkins. "Didn't know you'd be joining us." I managed a small nod. Neither did I. The others trickled in. My brother, Everett, who kissed Victoria's cheek and barely glanced at me, and a couple of her White House colleagues I'd never met. I felt like an intern who'd stumbled into the boardroom. The server poured coffee into dainty porcelain cups, steam rising in perfect curls. I kept my eyes down, fingers laced tightly in my lap. Victoria was telling some story about a recent policy win, something with funding and foreign delegations. Everyone listened like it was gospel. I tried to take a sip of my coffee and pretend I was invisible. Then it happened. Victoria's voice rose just enough to turn heads. "You know what's funny?" she said, setting her cup down with a soft clink. "Some people think showing up where they're not wanted makes them part of something." My heart skipped. Was she talking about me? She stood up slowly, taking her coffee cup with her. For a split second, I thought maybe she was leaving. Then, the coffee hit me before the pain did. Scalding liquid straight down my head and shoulders. It soaked into my blouse, blistering against my skin. I gasped, jerking back, but the shock held me frozen. "Get out!" she snapped. "You don't belong here." The cafe went dead quiet. Chairs scraped. Silverware paused mid-air. I didn't hear anything except the rush of blood in my ears and my own shaky breath. I looked around, half expecting someone, anyone, to say something, to stand up. My brother? He stared down at his plate like it had suddenly become fascinating. No one moved. No one said a damn word. The pain started to register, a raw sting where the coffee had burned my scalp. But worse was the shame. Not because of what she did, but because of what I didn't do. I didn't scream. I didn't throw something back. I didn't storm out with fire in my eyes like they do in the movies. Instead, I sat there, dripping, humiliated, swallowing every ounce of pride I had left like it was my last meal. The waiter brought over a napkin, white, thick, folded like a flower, and handed it to me without making eye contact. I took it, pressing it gently to my cheek, not to dry anything, but to steady myself. My hands shook. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt, but I didn't cry. Not then. Victoria leaned in close, voice low. "You're a nobody, Callista. Always were. That was her mistake. Not the coffee, not the scene, but saying it out loud. Because something inside me shifted in that moment, not like a snap, more like a quiet click. I stood up slowly, the wet fabric clinging to my back. I didn't say a word, just walked out of that cafe like I had nothing left to lose. But humiliation has a way of planting seeds, and that day, a seed of defiance began to grow. That night, sleep never came. The burn on my scalp had cooled, but not the sting beneath it. I laid still, listening to the sound of a city that never really slept. Sirens in the distance, the occasional honk, the hum of something broken in the wall vent. By dawn, I was already dressed. I moved quietly down the stairs of the townhouse, hoping to make a clean exit. No dramatic goodbye, no scene. Just gone. I figured I'd leave a note. Something polite. Distant. Let them pretend I'd left because I was overwhelmed, not humiliated. That'd make things easier for everyone, wouldn't it? I stepped into the kitchen. It was still dim, the early light barely touching the edge of the countertop. I reached for the kettle but stopped. I didn't want coffee. The thought of it made my throat tighten. I sat instead. Let my mind wander. Maybe I'd book a train. Head up to Boston for a few days. Be somewhere anonymous. That's when I heard it. Muffled voices just down the hall. The study. Door cracked open. I froze. Victoria's voice was unmistakable, even at a whisper. It had that clipped edge she saved for staff or service people who got her order wrong. Honestly, I don't know why your mother keeps pushing her into these things, she said, tone dripping with irritation. She's always been off. You saw her yesterday, sitting there like some drowned dog. I held my breath. Vic, that was Marcus. My brother. Victoria cut him off, mimicking me. I didn't know I'd be joining you. She laughed, low and sharp. Did you see how she looked when I poured it? She just sat there, like she didn't even know how to fight back. It's pathetic. Marcus laughed. Not a full laugh, just that weak, breathy sound people make when they know they should disagree, but don't want the hassle. She doesn't know how to be part of this world, Vic, he said. She never did. Always too sensitive. Too weird. My fingers curled into fists before I realized they were moving. It wasn't the insult that did it. I'd been called worse, thought worse about myself. It was the fact that he said it. My own brother. The same brother who used to pull me on a sled down our icy driveway until my fingers went numb. Who gave me his hoodie when I was 16 and heartbroken at some winter dance. Who promised, more than once, that I'd always have a place in this family. Now here he was, laughing along with the woman who dumped coffee on me in public like I was garbage that needed to be taken out. They kept talking. Something about the dinner next week, about seating charts and donors and making sure Callista stays out of the pictures. I didn't hear the rest. Or maybe I did, but my brain refused to hold it. I backed away from the door, every step careful. My breath felt thick. My legs moved on their own, up the stairs, into the guest room. I shut the door without a sound and collapsed onto the edge of the bed. I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at the wall. Not blinking. Not thinking. Eventually, I reached into my bag for something. Anything to do with my hands. My fingers brushed the soft fabric of the white napkin. The one from yesterday. I'd folded it, tucked it into my purse like a strange souvenir. I held it now, stared at the delicate stitching, the crease still visible from where I'd clutched it to my face. Yesterday, it felt like armor. Today, it felt like evidence. That no one, not even my own blood, would step in to protect me. That I was, in fact, alone. And yet, somewhere deep in my chest, beyond the ache, beyond the embarrassment, something else started to stir. Not defiance this time, Not yet. Something older. A memory I thought I'd buried. Something I hadn't thought about in years. I thought I had endured the worst, until a memory I had long buried came rushing back, one that explained why their words cut so deep. The memory didn't come back in flashes. It came in waves, slow, heavy, undeniable. I was 14, dressed in a second-hand navy dress that my mom said still had life in it. I'd brushed my hair until my scalp tingled, sprayed on a bit of her perfume without asking, and stood taller than I normally dared. That night, our family was attending a community recognition event at the city auditorium. Marcus was receiving an award for academic excellence. My older sister, back when she still came home for things, was listed in the program too, honored for a charity project she'd led over the summer. I was going because I thought I was part of it. I thought maybe they'd mention me too. I'd submitted a short story to the state writing contest, and I'd been selected for publication. It wasn't a trophy or a medal, but it mattered to me. I held on to the belief that someone in my family had told the organizers that maybe, just maybe, I'd see my name printed in that folded program under the stage lights. We pulled up in front of the auditorium in Richmond just after 6. Dad double-checked his tie in the rearview mirror while Mom was busy reapplying her lipstick. Marcus looked sharp in a blazer, polished and composed even then. I climbed out last, carrying our coats because Mom hated the idea of coat check and thought it made people look common. Inside, the lobby buzzed with polite applause, camera flashes, and the rustle of programs flipping open. I spotted a stack of the booklets on a table and grabbed one, heart pounding. Rowan, Marcus, Academic Honors. Rowan, Elise, Community Leadership. I scanned the rest, slowly, carefully, once, twice. My name wasn't there. I told myself maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they missed it. Maybe it was printed wrong. Then a woman tapped me on the shoulder. I turned, confused. "Would you mind taking this?" she asked, handing me a pea coat and a man's overcoat. "You're with staff, right?" I blinked. No, I'm not." "Oh," she said, laughing lightly. "Sorry, sweetheart. I saw you with the coats." She turned back to her husband like it was nothing. I looked down. I was still holding 4 jackets. 4. And that moment, that 1 second, carved a hollow space in me that never fully healed. I smiled at her because it was easier than explaining. Then I carried the coats to our row like a ghost. From our seats, I watched my dad put his hand on Marcus's shoulder. He leaned in and whispered something just before Marcus's name was called, and they both smiled like they shared a secret. I stared at the back of his neck, wondering if he'd even noticed I was there. I didn't mention the woman. I didn't say anything about the program. Later that night, as we drove home, Marcus held his plaque in his lap while Mom raved about how he was bound for something great. Dad agreed. "He's our frontrunner." No one asked about my story. No one knew it had been published. And I didn't tell them. What was the point? Back in the present, I sat on the edge of the guest bed, fingers clenched around the same white napkin I'd been holding. My chest was tight, not from the fresh sting of Victoria's words, but from the realization that the wound wasn't new. I'd been bleeding for years. Quietly. Invisibly. Victoria may have poured the coffee, but the pot had been simmering long before she ever entered our lives. She was just another voice added to the chorus that had always sung the same tune. I didn't fit. I didn't belong. I was a burden to be carried or ignored. That night at the auditorium came rushing back not as a surprise, but as proof. The same silence, the same dismissal, the same weight. And suddenly, I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't keep telling myself that this was just Victoria, that she was the only one treating me this way. I had thought Victoria's cruelty was new, but it was just the latest echo of a family legacy I could no longer ignore. Dinner on Sundays was always a formal affair in our family, not because we were celebrating anything, but because Father believed family tradition is best preserved through structure. That meant cloth napkins, polished silver, and conversations that felt more like boardroom briefings than any warm gathering. That evening, I helped in the dining room, laying out place settings with muscle memory built from years of being the quiet one. Victoria arrived fashionably late, of course, her heels clicking across the marble floor like punctuation marks. She kissed my mother on the cheek, called her darling, then slid into her seat with the confidence of a woman who had already won the room. Marcus followed her in silence, not looking at me, not saying a word about the scene I'd witnessed that morning behind the study door. I moved around them like smoke, present, but easy to miss. The table was set, wine poured, and polite chatter about the weather and political noise from Capitol Hill floated lazily between bites of roasted duck and asparagus. My father sat at the head of the table, a man still commanding despite his graying hair and the years that had stiffened his shoulders. He waited until the plates were nearly cleared before setting down his fork with a deliberate pause. He raised his glass, water, always water, and looked directly at Victoria. "I'd like to take a moment," he began, "to acknowledge the extraordinary work Victoria has done these past few months. Her name has become synonymous with poise and precision in this administration." Victoria tilted her head modestly, but her eyes sparkled. My father continued, "Given the importance of next week's state dinner and the need for dignified representation, I've decided that Victoria will attend on behalf of the family. She embodies the values we stand for." He turned to the rest of us. "Let's raise a glass." Everyone complied. Glasses clinked. I sipped slowly, though the wine had suddenly turned to dust in my mouth. No one looked at me, not even Marcus. My mother smiled as if reading from a cue card, murmuring something about a perfect choice. Victoria gave a practiced nod, the kind she probably used in press briefings. I sat there, invisible once again. I had rehearsed 100 versions of this moment in my head over the years, when I would finally say something, just enough to register as more than background noise. My heart thudded as I set down my glass. I cleared my throat, the sound louder than I intended. "Father," I said, keeping my voice steady, "what values do I represent?" The room froze, not dramatically, not like in movies, just quietly froze. No one moved, no one spoke. Only the faint clink of Marcus's fork scraping his plate filled the silence, like static on a radio. Victoria smirked into her wine. I saw it, clear as daylight. My father didn't blink. He looked at me, not with anger, but with something worse, disappointment, like I'd broken a rule that had always been unspoken. "Let's not make this about you," he said flatly, then turned to pass the butter to my mother. Just like that, the moment passed. But it didn't pass for me. I stared at my plate, untouched, the edges of my vision blurry with something heavier than anger. It wasn't just his words, it was how easily they came, how naturally they all fell back into rhythm, as if I hadn't spoken at all. Later that night, I lay in bed in the guest room, listening to the old pipes hum in the walls, the muffled steps of someone upstairs, probably Marcus heading to bed. The silence wasn't peaceful. It pressed against my ribs like something alive. I turned over, stared at the ceiling, and realized something that felt both terrifying and liberating at once. I could either keep swallowing their silence, or finally make them hear me. Morning light filtered through the gray clouds as I stood outside the East Wing entrance of the White House, hands trembling just enough that I had to shove them into my coat pockets. I wasn't even cold, just unsure of what I'd say, how I'd say it, whether I'd even be let through the door. But I had promised myself last night, no more silence, no more rehearsing comebacks in my head, only to swallow them whole. Security cleared me without issue. Of course, being a Rowan came with perks, the kind that opened doors but didn't guarantee you'd be welcomed once inside. I followed the hall to Victoria's office. Her assistant, a young woman with a perfectly pressed blazer and eyes too tired for her age, looked up from her desk. "Is she expecting you?" she asked, already skeptical. I nodded. "Tell her it's Callista. She'll see me." A pause, a brief check of the calendar. Then a reluctant, Go ahead. Victoria's office was larger than I expected. Minimal, modern, expensive in a way that didn't need to brag. She stood near the window, reading something on her phone. When I stepped in, she didn't look up right away. "Callista," she said, as if surprised I still existed. "Is this about yesterday?" "No," I replied, steadying my voice. "It's about the dinner." That made her look up. "I want to help," I said. "Not to prove anything, just to be part of it. I can research, write briefing notes, even help with logistics. I know I'm not you, but I can contribute." The pause that followed stretched longer than it should have. She crossed the room slowly, sat at her desk, and opened a drawer. "Interesting," she said, almost to herself. I waited, hopeful, foolish. She pulled out a cream envelope and placed it in front of her, tapping it twice. "Before we go any further," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I'd like you to read and sign this." I moved closer. She slid the envelope across the polished surface like a poker chip. I opened it carefully, half expecting a to-do list or a set of policy notes. Instead, it was a non-disclosure agreement. I looked up. Her smile grew. "It's standard. All our support staff sign one. You'd be considered periphery support. This just ensures you don't misinterpret your access as influence or overstep. Again." Behind me, I heard the subtle shift of her assistant in the outer room, the kind of movement people make when they're pretending not to listen but absolutely are. "Is this really necessary?" I asked. Victoria folded her hands. "Given recent events? Yes. This way we all stay protected." The words landed with more weight than they should have. Not because of what they were, but because of what they meant. I wasn't being offered a role. I was being offered containment, a muzzle. I stared at the paper. The legal jargon blurred as I read the first line again. By signing below, the undersigned acknowledges they will not represent, imply, or assert affiliation with the Rowan family in any public or professional setting. It didn't even say White House. It said Rowan family. I placed the envelope back on her desk, neatly. "Thank you," I said, each syllable stiff with effort. Victoria shrugged, already pulling her phone back into view. "Think it over." As I turned to leave, the assistant gave me a fleeting glance. Not pity, exactly, but something close. It made it worse. Somehow being humiliated in front of someone who barely knew me stung more than all the family dinners combined. I walked out with my back straight, heels clicking like hers had the night before. But once outside, the wind hit harder, the world louder. I didn't cry. I just kept walking, fast, like I had somewhere to be, something to do. But I didn't. I ended up at a bench across from Lafayette Square. I sat there with that sealed envelope in my bag, wondering if this was what they'd always seen in me. Someone to tolerate, not trust. Someone to manage, not include. I replayed Victoria's tone, my brother's silence, my father's dismissiveness, and for the first time in my life, I wondered if they were right. If my silence was all I had to offer. By the time I got back to the townhouse, it was almost midnight. The air inside was still, heavy, like the whole house had been holding its breath with me all day. I climbed the stairs without turning on any lights, letting muscle memory guide me down the familiar hall to the bedroom I had once called mine. It hadn't changed much. The bed still had the same quilt from my college years. The bookshelf, half empty, still leaned slightly to the right, warped from age and Virginia humidity. But it was the desk in the corner, the old wooden thing with one drawer that always stuck, that pulled my eyes. I dropped my coat on the bed and sat down, hands automatically reaching for the drawer handle. I wasn't even sure why. Maybe I just needed something to distract me from the NDA still sitting in my bag, untouched, unsigned. The drawer fought me at first, like always, then gave with a reluctant creak. Inside, dusty envelopes, a few dried-out pens, a cracked snow globe from a long-forgotten trip to Asheville. Beneath it all, pressed flat against the wood, was a cream-colored envelope with handwriting I hadn't seen in years. I froze. My name, just Callista, written in my grandmother's looping script. She passed almost a decade ago. There hadn't been a funeral, not one I was invited to. Victoria had said it was small, private, just immediate family, and somehow no one had corrected her. Not even Marcus. I stared at the envelope a long time before opening it. Inside was a letter, written in black ink, smudged in a few places where her hand must have rested. The paper smelled faintly of lavender, like the drawer sachets she used to keep in her dresser. My darling Callista. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to say what I needed to face. I've watched you grow with quiet pride. You, who never needed the spotlight to shine. You're stronger than you know, and smarter than this family gives you credit for. I've spoken with the lawyers. The deed to the Ashcroft cottage is in your name. It was always meant for you. You understood its quiet, its patience, just like you understood me. If anyone tells you otherwise, trust the papers. And your gut. With love that never faded. Gran. My breath caught. My fingers shook as I unfolded the second sheet. The deed. Not a copy, not a reference. The original, with her signature notarized, dated just 2 months before she passed. Ashcroft. The lakefront cottage she used to retreat to in late summer. I hadn't been there in years, but I remembered every inch. The screened porch, the creaky floorboards, the smell of pine needles and old books. Victoria had told me it was sold. Marcus had said the upkeep wasn't worth it. I hadn't questioned it at the time. I just accepted, like I always did. But here it was. My name, written in legal print, clear as daylight. I sat back in the chair, stunned. For a while, I didn't move. The room felt smaller, like the walls were finally leaning in to whisper what they'd been keeping from me all along. They lied, not just once, not just in passing, but deliberately, surgically, slicing pieces of me away and burying the proof in drawers they didn't think I'd open. My mind reeled. I thought back to the NDA, to the look on Victoria's face as she slid it toward me. Not protection, control. Keep quiet, stay small, stay in your place. Well, she missed one drawer, and suddenly, the napkin in my purse, the one I had clutched after the coffee incident, stained now with faint makeup and memory, felt different. It wasn't a symbol of silence anymore. It was survival. It was the last thing I held on to when they tried to wash me away. But tonight, I didn't feel invisible. I felt armed. I didn't know exactly what came next. But I knew this. I wasn't going to stay in the background anymore. Not when the truth had waited for me, folded in my grandmother's handwriting, all this time. That night, I realized I had something far more dangerous than anger. I had the truth. I didn't sleep much the night before. After finding my grandmother's letter, my thoughts paced just as restlessly as I did. I must have read that letter a dozen times, tracing the edges, mouthing her words, weighing the proof of it all in my hands. By morning, the fog of disbelief had lifted. What remained was clarity. It didn't roar like fury. It whispered, constant, firm, undeniable. Just after lunch, I texted Marcus. Coffee? Just us. He replied almost immediately. DuPont Circle. 2 o'clock? The irony wasn't lost on me. How I had once hoped coffee could mend something between us. This time I wasn't looking to be understood. I was watching, testing. I arrived first. The cafe was small, with mismatched chairs and sunlight pouring in from tall windows. I chose a booth near the back, one with a clear view of the door. My bag sat beside me, the letter and deed tucked carefully in a plain folder. Marcus walked in at 2:04, scanning the room until his eyes met mine. He looked tired. Maybe it was the weight of keeping secrets, or maybe it was just years of choosing silence over courage. He slid into the booth, offered a polite smile. Thanks for meeting, I said, voice steady. "Of course," he replied, nodding toward the barista. "Want anything?" "I'm good." For a moment we just sat. It could have passed for a normal catch-up between siblings, but my heart beat harder than it should have. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder, setting it on the table between us. "What's that?" he asked, already shifting uncomfortably. I didn't say anything. I opened it and turned the letter to face him. His eyes scanned the handwriting, then flicked to the deed. He didn't touch it, just stared. It only took him a few seconds to realize what it meant. "Where did you find this?" he asked quietly, voice thinner now. "In the desk drawer. My old room. Right where someone left it. Or forgot to take it." He looked away, jaw tightening. I leaned in, keeping my voice calm. "She wanted me to have Ashcroft. She made it legal. And you, both of you, buried it." Marcus didn't deny it. "I didn't," he started, but stopped himself. "It wasn't my idea." "But you knew." He nodded once, barely. The silence between us thickened, stretched, until he finally whispered, "You don't know what you're walking into, Callista. If you go after this, if you challenge her." He looked me dead in the eye. "She'll crush you. She has the network, the reputation. You think people will take your side over hers?" I expected him to defend himself, or at least pretend ignorance. But what came out was fear, raw, unfiltered. "You're scared of her," I said, half surprised. He let out a breath, almost a laugh, but there was nothing amused in it. "She doesn't lose, and she doesn't forget." "You're my brother," I said. "And you're warning me instead of helping me?" Marcus finally looked at me again, really looked at me. And I saw it. The guilt, the regret, the years of complicity he'd swallowed and justified. "I can't undo what's already happened," he murmured. "But I can tell you this. If you push, she'll push back harder. You think finding that letter changes anything? She'll make you regret ever opening that drawer." A server approached, placing a latte in front of him. He didn't touch it. Neither did I. I sat back, my hands in my lap, resting on the folder. His words didn't hurt the way I expected them to. They clarified things. He wasn't going to fight for me. He never had. And now, he was too deep in her world to ever crawl out. I stood slowly, sliding the folder back into my bag. "Thanks for your honesty," I said. "At least now I know where you stand." He looked like he wanted to say something, maybe even stop me. But he didn't. Outside, the wind had picked up. My coat flared as I stepped onto the sidewalk, the cold stinging sharper than usual. But inside, I felt oddly still, settled. If even my own brother feared her, then I knew the only way forward was straight through Victoria herself. The chandeliers caught every glint of silver and every polished smile like they were part of the performance. The state dining room shimmered. Uniformed servers moved with the silence of a ballet, and laughter rippled under the buzz of diplomatic pleasantries. I stood near the edge of the room, holding a glass I hadn't touched, watching it all unfold like I was behind a pane of glass. I wasn't wearing red to stand out. I wore navy to vanish. The letter and deed were folded in my clutch, small but weighty. I could feel the edges pressing against my palm, reminding me why I was here. Victoria floated through the crowd like she owned the marble under her heels. Every nod from a senator, every handshake from a foreign dignitary only sharpened her stride. She looked powerful. She looked like a Rowan. Marcus stood nearby, close enough to be counted but not close enough to protect me. Our parents, father with his trademark cool pride, mother with her smile that said nothing, watched from their table, blending perfectly into the white linen decor. I knew that look, It meant stay silent. Then the toast began. It was Victoria, of course, who rose to give it, introduced with soft applause and polished praise. "Tonight," she began, crystal flute in hand, "we gather not only in honor of diplomacy, but of heritage, of legacy." She let her eyes sweep the room, then paused, just long enough for the silence to tighten. "Some of us stand here on the shoulders of those who came before. Others are simply lucky enough to tag along." Laughter. Casual, too easy. A few guests glanced toward me with puzzled expressions, unsure if they missed a joke. I didn't smile. My face burned, not from surprise, but from the sting of familiarity. It was the coat room all over again. The award night with no name. A life of being reduced to background noise. But this time, I had something different in my corner. I had the truth. I waited. I let her finish, let the applause swell. I didn't interrupt her moment. That was the beauty of it. When the clapping died down and Victoria took her seat again, I stood slowly. No fork tapping. No drama. "May I say a few words?" I asked, my voice carrying more confidently than I felt. The room stilled. Even the servers paused. Victoria's smile tightened just a bit. "Of course, Callista," she said sweetly. "We'd love to hear from the family historian." Another laugh. But this time, it didn't carry. People were listening now. I stepped forward, unclasped my clutch, and carefully unfolded the letter and deed onto the table before me. My voice didn't waver. "This was written by my grandmother," I began. "A woman whose name many of you know. A woman who built the very foundation this family still walks on." I read aloud. "To my granddaughter Callista. You are the one who sees through the noise, who endures not by force, but by knowing what matters. This house, this legacy, belongs with you. Protect it." A few murmurs rippled. I held up the deed next. This was signed and notarized before she passed, naming me, not Marcus, as the inheritor of Ashcroft. Victoria's hand was frozen around her champagne glass. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I let the paper speak louder than any outburst ever could. "In the name of appearances, I've been made invisible. But this," I tapped the letter gently, "makes me impossible to erase." I walked back to my seat. No one stopped me. No one clapped either. But the silence itself was a victory. I placed the letter on my plate. Next to it, folded like a badge of survival, was the linen napkin, the same kind Victoria had used to wipe up her coffee from my lap, but this one was clean. For once, she was the one trembling, and I was the one who stayed silent. The morning sunlight hit different after a storm. It filtered through the curtains of the Rowan townhouse with an almost mocking softness, as if nothing had changed, as if the night before hadn't happened. But it had. The newspapers came early, lined up like quiet judges on the kitchen island. Their headlines didn't scream, but they whispered just loud enough to shake walls. Family rift unfolds at state dinner. Private legacy becomes public drama. Behind the smile, the cracks in the Rowan name. Every photo captured the moment my hand unfolded that letter. Victoria's frozen expression. My own, calm and unwavering. I sat at the far end of the dining table, same chair I used to sit in as a child. Invisible, listening to the adults talk about things I didn't understand. But this morning, no one was talking. Father flipped the paper once and set it down without a word. Mother held her teacup like it might shatter if she moved too quickly. Marcus wasn't there yet. And Victoria, well, she was coming. I could feel it. I stood, walked toward the sunroom, and let the morning air hit my skin. My hand brushed the outside of my coat pocket. The napkin was still there, not crumpled, not stained, clean and folded. I didn't even know why I still carried it. Maybe it wasn't for defense anymore. Maybe it was just mine. A loud slam broke the silence. The front door. Her heels. Her voice. "Are you proud of yourself?" She didn't bother with greetings. Her voice cut straight through the room, slicing past the awkward quiet of our parents, through the guilt Marcus wore on his face as he finally entered behind her. Victoria stood in the foyer like she owned the very structure holding us all together. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I met her eyes, and I didn't flinch. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she hissed, striding closer. "To your family? To me?" I told the truth, I replied evenly. She laughed, that bitter kind of laugh that never reaches the eyes. "You humiliated your own blood in front of ambassadors, senators, the press. You just made yourself the face of betrayal." "No," I said. "That would be you." Victoria's nostrils flared, her jaw clenched tight. "You think anyone's going to believe you over me? You think one dusty letter and a deed changes anything? I still have more influence in my back pocket than you'll ever have in your entire life." She turned toward our father, expecting him to rise, but he stayed seated. No defense, no interjection, not even a glance. That silence was louder than any shouting match could have been. Her voice dropped into something colder, almost trembling. "I will bury you, Callista. If you try to use this against me, I swear." "Swear what?" I asked, stepping closer. "That you'll use the same political contacts who watched you unravel last night. That you'll spin more lies to cover the last ones?" Her mouth opened, but no words came. She looked around the room again, waiting for someone to speak up. No one did. "Wow," she whispered. "You people are pathetic." She turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind her hard enough to rattle the frame. But this time, it didn't rattle me. Marcus stood awkwardly, shifting his weight, glancing toward the floor. "Callista," he finally said, voice low. I didn't know she'd—" "You did," I cut in. He blinked. "No, You always knew. Maybe not the details. Maybe not the letter. But you knew how she treated me. You watched it. You let it happen. Over and over again." He looked away, the shame spreading slowly over his face. "I'm sorry," he muttered. But not to me. Not really. He was apologizing to the image of himself he'd just lost. "Don't be," I said gently. "You never fought for me before." "I don't expect you to start now." I walked past him, brushing his shoulder lightly, not to comfort him, but to free myself from the weight of waiting for something more. Out on the sidewalk, the day had fully arrived. A warm breeze moved the leaves, and the street carried on like the world hadn't shifted in our living room. I kept walking. I didn't go back to my apartment, not yet. Instead, I took the long way around toward the park just north of the Smithsonian, where the noise of the city fades under the rustling trees. There was an empty bench facing a fountain. I sat down and took a breath so deep I could feel my ribs stretch for the first time in years. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the napkin. It was the same one from that first dinner, the one Victoria used to clean herself after pouring coffee on me, the one I had clutched in my lap while they clapped for her speech, the one I nearly threw away a dozen times, but always ended up folding neatly again, tucking into whatever bag I carried. Now it lay open in my palm, plain white against my skin. It wasn't a shield anymore. It wasn't proof of pain. It was something else now. Something mine. I folded it once more, slowly, carefully. The same way I was folding up this chapter of my life. And maybe not every wound had healed. Maybe the scars would itch sometimes. But the silence I once feared, I didn't carry it anymore. What I carried now was mine, my truth, my voice, and that was enough. Have you ever realized that walking away was the strongest thing you could do? Tell me your story. I read every comment.